For as long as I've been making videos on this channel, I've been getting requests for Ranger X. It's not too surprising. Before I found myself locked into the world of MechWarrior games, I've been focusing heavily on retro games. In fact, I'd fallen deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole of Sega console titles, which seem to have a plethora of passionately made mech and sci-fi titles. Working through these is how I came across BattleTech, also known as MechWarrior 3050 on the Super Nintendo, and well, we know what happened after that. Still, so many people had told me about Ranger X and I'd never gotten around to playing it. If you're at all familiar with the mindset that can be adopted after long-term content creation on YouTube, you know why this is. MechWarrior videos were making an impact on my channel, and I'd simply follow the viewership numbers in hopes of getting noticed. It's not that I didn't enjoy them or anything like that, but playing such a large series in a short amount of time really hurt my creative drive and focus. So here I am, looking back at another great gem on the Sega Genesis, or megadrive depending on where you're from. And it's in large part to my viewers that I've been able to dig up titles like Ranger X, so thank you. My sanity greatly appreciates your contribution. Developed by GAU Entertainment, Ranger X is a 1993 mecha game released on Sega's second console. In Japan, it was known as ex-ranza. However, aside from a secret Alex Kidd level and a different credit sequence, there isn't any difference between the two. That is, aside from the cover art. Ex-ranza, as with almost all Japanese versions of a game, has way better art. I just want to buy it for my shelf, and I'm not even a collector. I'm just one of those weirdos who actually plays their games. Ranger X is one of those titles known by few these days, but experienced by enough to be considered a cult classic. Unlike games like Phantom Crash, this one seems to have some basis for this status. You know, aside from being part of those fluffy, nostalgic memories no one can seem to let go of. If you're new to Ranger X and you're looking for a fun and unique side-scrolling shooter on the Sega Genesis, then you absolutely won't be disappointed. There isn't any unbearable lore and certainly no elitist community to bog down your fun. For this title, GAU Entertainment's primary goal was to create something wholly original. Designer Toshio Yamamoto stated that he didn't want the title to be bound by the need to imitate others. These days, words like that are thrown around by suit and tie marketers to trick gamers into thinking their multi-million-dollar shooter is the next big thing. And when that $60 finally changes hands, players only end up with another half-baked Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 remake. In 1993, this statement barely made complete sense, especially considering that GAU was comprised of former Wolf Team members, who were very well known for developing highly original titles. I mean, they weren't always great, as was the case with Final Zone, the Sega Genesis version of FZ Senkai Axis, but yes, certainly very original. There were definitely games that borrowed from one another, and undoubtedly a handful of copycats, but nothing even came close to the outpouring of same olds we get nowadays. I wonder what Yamamoto thinks of the state of gaming today, considering how he felt way back in 1993, yikes. Thankfully, GAU certainly succeeded in its ambitions with Ranger X, receiving incredibly high review scores across the board. However, this success would only lead them down a much more complicated path. Over time, the group would be put through the ringer as it merged with Next Tech, becoming Next Entertainment. In 1997, they would be bought out by Sega and re-emerge as an independent studio in 2003 before ultimately shutting down in 2016. Throughout their existence, they were considered third-party contract developers. Apparently, they were involved in such titles as Time Crisis, Dino Crisis, Resident Evil Code Veronica, Shenmue, and Bayonetta. While they undoubtedly worked on many other big titles, it's difficult to pinpoint exactly what Next Entertainment's contributions were or whether they acted as a sort of ghost developer. One thing is certain though, the design philosophy seen in Ranger X is evident in almost everything else they were involved with. Despite being released on the Genesis, Ranger X is a surprisingly varied shooter that doesn't outstay its welcome. Its relatively short playtime is easily forgiven because the game is simply fun to play. This is especially great considering that in 1993, saving your game wasn't always an option. So all you could hope for was an experience fun enough to justify the numerous game overs you'd face. Because GAU prioritized gameplay, focusing on refining the core mechanics before adding extra elements, Ranger X goes down as one of the best playing games on the system. The control scheme takes a moment or two to master. The left and right button rows fire weapons for either Ranger X or its bike. The center buttons fire special weapons, and pressing up on the D-pad jumps, allowing your mech to fly in short bursts. Additionally, players can ride the bike or merge with it completely. This grants a homing fire mode, the ability to switch weapons, and a completely separate health bar. However, use it wisely. The middle third of the game features a support ship that allows merging only to switch special weapons, not piloting. Thankfully, it still provides some support by firing at nearby enemies. This might all sound complex, but it's not that bad. After all, if you can enjoy MechWarrior, you'll be absolutely fine with this. Each stage has a clear objective, culminating in a boss fight against either a massive mechanical enemy or, very rarely, a strange biological creature. But I'm going to be saving those for later. Admittedly, these goals all revolve around destroying something. Targets may include anti-air fixtures, subterranean drills, drop pods, or defenses on a massive building, but the core objective remains the same. However, difficulty ramps up the challenge by adding more targets and enemy placements on harder modes. Ranger X keeps these limited objectives engaging by throwing the player into unique and dynamic environments to explore and fight through. There's very little repetition in level design or enemy types. Aside from the Ranger X itself, I can't actually recall any reused area elements or enemies. Does this game truly feature entirely new foes in every single stage? Well, it certainly seems that way. Even basic enemies require some tactical thinking beyond just shooting. You might need to blast a hole in the roof to expose them to light, nudge them into water, or ram them to force them to drop their shields. Discovering these effective takedown methods is not only a core aspect of combat, but also immensely satisfying. The bosses in Ranger X are some of the best I've ever seen in a Genesis game, and describing them is a challenge most people face when something is simply excellent. Visually, they're impressive. GAU pulls out all the stops, using every tool in the console's arsenal to pit you against creations that fly out of the background or use pulsating sprite trails as limbs. The developers play cleverly with perspective, and these boss encounters showcase the game's most impressive visuals. Back in the day, the reward for pushing through a game was often facing massive, well-designed bosses that trounced you. Ranger X absolutely delivers on that promise. As a mech towering over humans, Ranger X should feel threatened by its enemies, and the game ensures that you're facing foes that truly pose a significant threat. Most of them are machines, usually walking fortresses or weaponry capable of taking out an entire city. The US manual gives some roundabout explanation as to why these things are attacking, which basically boils down to we're being attacked by these guys. However, there are a set of scenes that occur during gameplay that hint towards an actual storyline. For instance, during the first boss encounter, a single woman is kidnapped. At the very end of the game, a man has her captured in the center of a room before entering a massive mech. And when the game is completed on its hardest difficulty, you're presented with a scene of the Ranger X pilot meeting her on a beach. So maybe there is something contained within the Japanese manual that explains this. Sadly, while I can read a bit of Japanese, I'll never actually know, because I can't find any scans of the ex-ranza version online anywhere. So if you've got this far in the video and happen to have a copy, feel free to shed some light on this if you can. One boss that stands out to me as strange and perhaps was placed in the game strictly for variety is the eyeball boss. This thing sits in the water, shooting twinkling light at the player. The only way to take it out is to shoot its eye when it opens. After that, its brain leaves its body and begins attacking you with killer bubbles. Everything else makes sense here, aside from this thing, and I had to make note of it due to its extremely peculiar presence here. I felt a bit like the developers were just playing with ideas, and so much work had gone into the sprite and animations that they weren't about to leave it on the cutting room floor. Then again, the developers stated that most of Ranger X was pieced together on the fly without design documents of any sort, so this boss might have been a product of that wild process. It's a wonder that, doing things as they did, GAU was able to include so much. It isn't often that you see a game that uses the system's very rudimentary 3D capabilities, but it's even rarer that they appear at the beginning of every stage and make visual sense. A part of me did think that these might have been complicated 2D scenes, but no. There is a debug mode that allows these small scenes to be explored, which is extremely impressive on its own, even if the mode is delegated to cheat input. Yoshinobu Hiraoka, known primarily for his work on the AD Police soundtrack, composed the music for Ranger X. He described the goal here as seeking a darker tone, drawing inspiration from rock and progressive music. While the soundtrack doesn't quite achieve that darkness, it's undeniably excellent. Ranger X's music is energetic and upbeat, perfectly capturing the fast-paced action. Despite some repetition throughout the stages, it remains consistently engaging. Perhaps the definition of dark in video game soundtracks has shifted since 1993. Regardless, Hiraoka crafted something truly special here. It's a shame that his contributions to media in general seem to have stopped around 2001. Of course, I'd love to show you just how good the music is, but YouTube would have my head for it. So here are a few clips of select tracks I personally enjoyed. As I've said, in the ex-ranza version, there is a secret level centered around Alex Kidd. For the life of me, despite trying countless times at varying speeds, I couldn't get the code to unlock this level to work. I've seriously never put so much effort into repeating a simple combination in my life. So, having nowhere else to turn, I had to dig up an old PAR code to get into the level through the North American version. This hidden stage is a bright and colorful field where the player must take out several helicopter creatures. Much like every other stage in the main game, it has its own set of art and everything is entirely unique to it. Even the background music is unused in the main game. Basically, you evade hidden mines, fry some cats, and kill evil bulbs to destroy vines and complete your objective. For all the fuss I went through trying to get this level to work, I'd hoped it to be a lot longer than the roughly 1 minute experience it was. Still though, a nice little bonus overall. Ranger X, or ex-ranza, is an outstandingly good game. While I don't really like the overhyping that a lot of cult classics receive, this one earns it easily. It doesn't really matter if you like mecha, this game is hands down a good, well-paced, and entirely fair action game that'll have you falling in love with Sega Genesis all over again. Though, don't expect many titles to do what this one did, as likely Ranger X is one of the few titles that did fully utilize the system's power.